At Park Bank, we believe drive and ambition come from the deepest parts of who we are. We view achievement not as a selfish pursuit, but as a way to improve the lives of our clients, our associates, and our neighbors. We believe ultimately ambition is driven by the heart. We've grown considerably since our start as a small community bank on Park Street, and yet we've always understood that our success depends on the success of others. Our story of ambition starts right here, in the hearts of every member of our team. Our backgrounds may be different, but our values are the same. We believe in giving more than we take, that we are more successful together, and that collaborative spirit and drive are inherent in all of us. Some of our greatest pride comes from collaborating with local entrepreneurs to build vibrant businesses that make Dane County unique. We take the time to build lasting relationships and provide exceptional service grounded in shared values. Together, we bring ambition to fruition. We're privileged to work with local causes, volunteering our time and resources to make a difference in the lives of people who make our home a place unlike anywhere else. By giving back, we all move forward. As far as we've come at Park Bank, we don't ever stop at good enough. We're always looking for the next challenge, the next opportunity, the next accomplishment. Together, we can get there, anywhere, from right here. Park Bank. Let's get to next.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Madison 365, for having us to discuss this very important topic to our community, that is Pulse Check, the future of health and wellness for men of color. A very important topic. We have a great panel today, experts in the field that will be joining us, answering a few questions. And then the attendees will also have an opportunity to ask questions directly to the panel. Joining us today, we have Walter Williams, who's the CEO of Think and Grow LLC. It's a mental health and life coaching company here in Madison. Originally from Chicago, Walter studied rehabilitation psychology at the University of Madison. We have Aaron Bigbird, who has served as the Director of Travel Relations at the University of Wisconsin-Madison since March of 2020. He came to Madison originally in 2000 as the American Indian Student Academic Service Coordinator. He earned his bachelor's degree from the University of Washington, Seattle, and a master's degree from UW-Madison. We also have Lawrence Williams, who is the Senior Regional Director of Human Resources at Charter Communications since 2018. He is committed to the importance of HR and recognizing and driving the performance of people as value assets to companies. He previously was the HR Regional Director for SP Plus Corporation. He received a master's degree from Industrial Labor Relations from Cornell University and his bachelor's in political science from Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. With that, I'll also let the panel introduce themselves briefly, starting with Mr. Williams. Walter.
Yes. Hello, everyone. As Juan said, I'm Walter. I'm based in Verona, Wisconsin. I serve as a mental health therapist or psychotherapist, which is essentially someone who helps one work through their issues or their concerns, or just someone to talk to, or as a life coach, helping to hold others accountable. And I consider myself a servant of the community. So good to be here with you.
Thank you, Walter. Next, Aaron.
Yeah, hello. My name is Aaron Birdbear. I'm a member of the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation. I'm also a descendant of the Navajo Nation. I'm the inaugural Tribal Relations Director here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, a place I've worked at for 22 years now. And so Wisconsin is now my home, although I'm not indigenous to the Western Great Lakes. my role is to help our university forge better partnerships with the 12 Native American nations here in Wisconsin. So thank you for having us.
Thank you, Aaron. And next, also Mr. Williams, Lawrence.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lawrence Williams. I'm the executive regional HR person for Charter Communications, which is Spectrum Cable, here in the Central Region, which covers Southern Illinois, all of Missouri, Kansas, Wisconsin, Eastern Minnesota, as well as Lincoln, Nebraska. I've been here for about 4 years now in the Madison area. It's been a great experience. I'm originally from Chicago, born and raised. I spent 16 years living in New York prior to moving here. And I've seen a lot in my years in HR because I handle recruiting, training, employee relations, and lately a lot of diversity with diverse hires, which we're trying to reach our goals at the executive and leadership levels. So great to meet you all.
Thank you, Lawrence, for joining us. With that, we'll move on to a few questions that we have prepared for the panel that would highlight, again, the importance of health and wellness in our communities. The first question I'd like to ask Walter, and this relates to the stigma around mental health for men of color. As you know, coming from a Hispanic background, the thought was always, if you seek mental health, it's because something must be wrong with me, right? So the question, Walter, is how do we work to erase the stigma surrounding mental health among men of color?
Yeah, no, great question. And I think you definitely led into what my response would be. And really is like, we no longer as men just have to pretend that everything is all right all the time. I think society and growing up, you were taught to be strong, and that asking for help can appear to be weak or not make you manly. So I think we start to erase and poke holes in the stigma by letting folks know that it's okay to just have conversations about what you're going through and what you're experiencing. And nothing has to be wrong for you to have a conversation. I also believe that therapy or mental health experiences is in everything that we do. So it's not all the time one has to sit across from a therapist like myself to have a conversation. But being in community with others who can challenge you and can help you be better, who can pour into you, I think helps to erase the stigma and let us know that even when things are okay, we can still have a conversation and seek help and talk about what we're experiencing. But I would say that would be my approach. To starting to erase, well, that is my approach, honestly, not would be, of just poking holes in the stigma as I draw men in to talk about things that they are experiencing, whether it's critical issues or the fact that they live in the best life they can live and being able to support them in that manner.
Yeah. Thank you, Walter. Next question is to Aaron. Aaron, oftentimes, obviously, we all want to be healthy, right? We want to be healthy individuals, but sometimes the key is knowing how to get there. So the question is, what changes specifically have you made towards your wellness and health in the last 2 to 3 years, and how did you decide to do that?
I made radical changes to my lifestyle in the last few years, and it's not because I was suddenly motivated. There's a kind of saying that says, people don't change when they see the light, they change when they feel the fire. Even though we know what good behaviors are out there for us to do, we don't embrace behavior change because it's so hard to do. But I am fortunately, Native Americans, we have health disproportionalities in a few areas: heart disease, cancer, diabetes. And I'm one of those statistics where I have a cancer that's completely not understood. And it's incredibly aggressive and has a really high kind of fatality rate. And so for me, I had to kind of think about, well, what can I control for my health? And I thought about my past behaviors and the foods that I was eating and my kind of workaholism where I worked super hard and kind of sacrificed my well-being a little bit for trying to do good work here at the institution. And getting cancer, forced me to think about, okay, I have a disease that the doctors don't know how to treat. No one's exactly sure what the outcomes will be. So what are the 4 things that I can really control for my own wellness? And that's my diet, right? It's like 80-20 or maybe even 90-10. Health is what you eat. It's like you can work out all you want, but if you're eating the wrong stuff, it's not going to produce health for you. And so with the type of cancer I have, my doctors want me to be as vegetarian as possible. And so although I didn't cut out chicken or turkey entirely, I lead a mostly plant-based diet today to try to give myself the best shot of health. We can control our diet, we can control our sleep, we can control our fitness, and we can control our stress to some degrees, right? So those are about the 4 things that I try to focus on for my well-being today. And I just try to make sure to prioritize my health over work and other things, the ways that I wasn't necessarily doing in the years prior. And so I think, unfortunately, being one of the statistics of kind of indigenous kind of people who have cancer and are surviving cancer, it really forced me to confront what I was eating and what I was prioritizing in my life. And I realized I had to prioritize my own wellness to a much higher level if I wanted to be, a contributing member to our communities, to contributing member to the academic community. And so I think of just trying to really embrace those 4 kind of areas of things that I can do for myself. And although, the food change was the hardest change I think I've ever had to make in my life, walking away from pork and beef, I'm still frustrated about a pizza because it's not a pizza unless it has pepperoni on it in my world. But I've learned to kind of adjust and move away and eat like plant-based burgers with fake bacon on them. And I think of all the kind of ways I'm trying to make it through in the world as I eye the hot links and so desperately want to go get some hot links somewhere. But to make good choices for myself, I recognize that, unfortunately, with the kind of health conditions that I've experienced, I really have to focus on, sleep and exercise and diet and trying to reduce stress and just trying to remind myself about what's really important in the world. And what's important to us is our connections with the loved ones in our lives, our friends and our family. And, we'll never regret time we spend with our loved ones and our family. Once we kind of get to the point where I was at near death and recognizing like all that time at work, was that really the best spending of my time? Or was it more important to be with the people who care and know me? And I realized that, reprioritizing those parts of my life was just a really important decision for me to make. And like I said, I knew those were the right decisions to make a long time ago, but, behavior change is one of the hardest things we have. And I was just confronted with something that really asked me to consider what I was doing with my life and how I could seek better wellness for myself.
Thank you, Aaron. That's very crucial, right? Try to moderate, our habits, try to eat nutritious food. And as you mentioned, it's oftentimes not very easy to engage in that behavior, right? I mean, for me, especially, Mexican food is not the healthiest, but it's so good, right? So it's kind of hard to change your behaviors, to just prioritize what's important, which is our well-being. Right. And just make sure that we understand how all everything that we eat impacts our health.
I still have a few cheats. I still have a few cheats out there for the spiritual nourishing that we need.
Maybe get the cheese.
But it's a very special, rare treat, right? So, but I still have that out there, but I make sure to prioritize, the good stuff most of the time.
If I can add, I love what you're saying there, Aaron, because it becomes a lifestyle change and from on my side, luckily, I haven't been diagnosed with anything, and I've been fortunate to be fairly healthy. But most of my family are older, and I know high blood pressure, strokes, cardiovascular, all of those things run in my family. So as a young man, I had to begin to think, what can I be aging into that I just don't know that may be passed down genetically? Both my parents died when I was 14 and 15 years old. So I didn't get a chance to watch them get older and what conditions they may experience. So similar to you, Aaron, I had to think about, okay, what can I control? And that's when I began to think about what I ate, my physical activities, just staying active and doing a lifestyle shift, but just change my purpose, my why, right? And once I thought about, okay, I want to live a long time and outlive my parents. So what can I do now to prepare for what can potentially come? So I really love what you're saying, Aaron. That's spot on. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I agree as well. And one of the things that you just said, Walter, is one of the things I think that we have to be concerned about, because a lot of us are very healthy, or so we think we're very healthy until we find out there is something. And that's the thing. I was that way. Like, okay, I would do my yearly physical and some other things, go to the doctor. But, I didn't really pay that much attention to what was going on and what my body was telling me until it was too late. So, with that being said, it was a kind of a storm because I found out, like, my mother became really ill. She had cancer, and then she passed away. And at that time, my brother was diagnosed with cancer and I was diagnosed with cancer just last year. So, I felt great. I didn't have anything. There were some minor things, and you figure that this happens when you're in your early 50s, so it's not a big deal. But there are things, and I think that's part of one of the questions later about the stigmas that, okay, I'm healthy, but there may be one minor thing, but you should always, your body is telling you something. Absolutely. And you should always make sure you find out or seek what your body is trying to tell you. So,
no, right on, man.
Yeah, no, thank you, Lawrence. And that actually leads me to my next question. It was towards one of the last that we wanted to address, but I want to make sure that we ask this very important question. And this goes to Lawrence. How do we get men to take the first step to seek that, that first appointment? And how do we encourage someone to seek out help, if we remove the stigma?
I think one of the things is that we have to, folks who have ailments or issues or have family members that have ailments or issues, these are the things that we have to talk about. Once I was diagnosed with cancer, I made sure, like every friend of mine, I asked them, have they had this checked? Have they had certain levels checked? And if not, make sure you go to the doctor. I'm like, and if it's a doctor that, you're not that fond of, you can always seek out others. And another thing I think we have to do is we have to make sure that the folks who find great doctors, make sure we let others know about them in the medical field. You find a great place, a great hospital, or a great organization, you make sure others know about them. Because I actually had some medical run-ins when I was in New York before I left, and the doctor didn't make it seem like it was a huge issue. And I didn't learn until later that it was an extreme issue. And I actually had a chance to meet with some doctors here, but it was based on, me knowing someone else that was a doctor to get me in to see them. So, I know plenty of us know mental health practitioners or health practitioners and doctors. We need to make sure that you utilize them to get information or seek out folks who can actually assist you with, the issues you're having. You really need help navigating the system. And that's the thing. If you are not used to navigating the system, then you will get lost in it. And that was one of the things that happened to my mother last year. I was going back and forth and I had family there, but they weren't used to navigating the system. So it's like my mother sort of got lost in the shuffle. And luckily, towards the end, there was a doctor that actually here at the University of Wisconsin, or the medical group, actually sat on a call with me and my siblings and had a conversation with our doctor in Chicago to give us clarification on what was really going on. So we have to utilize any of those networks. We have to make sure that we do our own research and spread the word to our friends, family, and anyone else. We should be screaming from the rooftops, because I really would like for my situation, for it to have been caught a lot sooner than it actually was. And it's, we don't talk about these things. So
that's true.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lawrence. That's very important. And that is also a good segue to the next question that I had for Walter. And that relates to, as you mentioned, Lawrence, the importance of having someone and a professional that understands the cultural barriers when it comes to seeking, mental health professionals. And if you, Walter, could just stress how important this is in finding a professional that relates to your background. Because I know, for example, when I was looking for someone specifically, I wanted someone that, obviously, I speak English, but I wanted someone that also spoke Spanish. Why? Because I felt, they'll at least understand what I go through. So can you talk a little bit about that, that particular case?
No, absolutely. I think personally, it's extremely important that We seek out professionals and mental health providers who look like us and who understands. Ultimately, because I believe, in our culture, it's as my mom would say, what's understood don't have to be explained, right? Some things you can just bring up and talk about and not have to explain it or dumb it down, if you will, for, someone who may be a white clinician to understand. And not that they wouldn't be able to best serve you, but sometimes I think as Black men and as brown men, we and in our indigenous brothers, we become a bit hesitant to divulge and share certain information because it's the fear of, will you understand what I'm talking about? Will you get where I'm coming from? Will you be able to relate to my experiences? And having someone to sit across from you who can understand, who can relate, and just be like, hey, I don't get it, but help me understand, and not have, I wouldn't say a lot of sympathy, right? Sympathy is, oh, poor thing, that's so terrible that happened to you. But someone who can empathize and say, hey, I know what it's like to be in your shoes, or I don't know what it's like, but let me imagine what it's like to be in your shoes to understand how you feel, what you may be going through. But I think it's extremely important to have someone that looks like you in our health spaces. But we know that that's difficult in SLIM in Wisconsin, just in general. So if that becomes difficult, I think it's important to begin to build community for yourself of individuals who look like you, who, like Lawrence was saying, who you can challenge and say, hey, man, what's up? You taking care of yourself, where you are mentally, where you are physically. I'll go with you to the doctor if you're scared or feel uncomfortable. Like, just to have that accountability and have that support, I think goes a long way, because it's not all the time one can sit across with someone who looks like them. But there's other methods and mechanisms we can use to still have that support and get to the end goal. But yeah, I think it's vital. I don't know if Aaron or Lawrence want to add to that.
Yeah, I would like to add to that, because I think one of the things that came up is that, when it's someone that's not Black or brown, they usually, the go-to thing is what the studies say. And so,
right.
You have to question. So I asked, well, so how many Black or brown folks are in this study? And they're like, well, it's close to zero, or such a small percentage. So, it's like, well, how does that really relate to me? Like, I need something, tell me about how this relates to me. And so I had to seek out several other doctors and get several, different opinions, which you should as well. But I mean, some that were just extremely honest, like, you know what, when you hear about studies a lot, we don't participate in the studies. So it's like, okay, I understand everyone else's treatment, but what about my treatment? You have to think about you, and that's for mental health and physical health. And so, in doing that, I came across someone who was extremely helpful. But I mean, that's one of the things, since we are not, I would say that we're not really as tied to the medical community as we should be. You have to find those who can help you understand and get through the minutia. But yeah, it's like, one of the doctors told me, it's like, they're going to throw the studies at you for this treatment. And, we're not in the studies. So it just
Right.
can't, as my practitioner, someone who's helping me and assisting me, we just, you have to explain it in a different way. If you're a medical practitioner out there, it's just not the studies. There are some other things that, you need to make folks feel comfortable about. And that's, I had to really look for that. So.
Yeah, I'd love to add a little bit to that as well. Is that, unfortunately, my family experienced a tragedy when our 15-year-old kid walked on a couple of years ago. And so, losing a child is such a traumatic event. And in the past, I've always sought just kind of peer groups, where people kind of share their truth with one another and we all learn together about kind of the commonness of our experiences. And we, you're not trying to provide advice necessary to people, but you're just kind of sharing, whatever specific kind of area of kind of understanding you need, whether it's mental health or physical health. And in this case, I didn't realize the power of social workers. And so, I'm a non-Christian Indigenous person. And so, I have a lot of kind of concerns about, people kind of bringing into that kind of lens of and viewpoint to kind of helping me heal as a person. And so I often try to find people who are kind of outside of the Christian tradition to can provide healthcare for me, or kind of any sort of a spiritual or kind of emotional care. And thankfully, social workers were able to help me find a really good kind of mental health practitioner. And so the first time in my life, I started seeing a counselor to kind of help me process the grief of losing a child. And it was really fortunate they found me a Cherokee descendant counselor who, brings to me an understanding of kind of traditional forms of healing, kind of the dialogues and kind of actions that I can do to kind of help me process the grief of losing a child. And so I just give a big shout out to social workers. I had no idea that they could be these agents who could go find, culturally responsive healthcare practitioners for us people who, have a little bit of concern or doubts or about the perspectives and biases that people might be bringing into healthcare spaces.
Sure.
Thank you, Aaron and Lawrence, for adding to that. And want to note, right, if a particular tool that now some health insurance providers offer is that you look for a practitioner. There are certain filters that can be used to filter all the certain professions, background, language, gender. Some you can't precisely find the professional that we want, but at least we can maybe filter out some of the things that we specifically seek out. Mm-hmm. And that leads me to my next question for Aaron. Aaron, you mentioned, Lawrence, you mentioned, some of the limitations sometimes in looking for institutions because, you've just talked about the studies and sometimes the studies don't relate to you. And I had a question here for Aaron that related to the things that an institution can do to promote the programs to address this, chronic diseases that sometimes our community face. I don't know if you've seen any programs that are successful in trying to engage communities of color to address some of the chronic diseases that are more that we as men of color are more prone to have, like hypertension and heart disease. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can begin a little bit and just reminding us that, indigenous peoples, we have some disproportionate health outcomes, and most of it's related to colonization. And so people don't recognize that, for almost 100 years, Native American language and culture was criminalized in the United States. And the United States was set on an eradication program to destroy all indigenous language and culture. And the easiest way to do that was family separation. By removing children from their families for many, many generations. And so my grandparents were forcibly removed from their families and put into kind of off-reservation boarding schools where they experienced inordinate amounts of physical, sexual abuse. And so we think about adverse childhood experiences as we understand them today and how toxic adverse childhood experiences are. And my grandparents endured years of adverse childhood experiences. And so the same is true for most indigenous families, that we're all connected to kind of these really difficult experiences of our ancestors. And we're still trying to heal from them. And it's probably going to take us 2 or 3 more generations to find stability as we try to confront the kind of dysfunction that results from such incredible amounts of toxicity of experiences in young peoples. And so I kind of think about the importance of acknowledging how colonization plays a role in shaping indigenous health today, kind of understanding the root causes. And so most people, unfortunately, in the United States, 4 out of 5 people know little to nothing about Native Americans. And that's by design. As a settler colonial society, all settler colonial societies are focused on an organizing principle and goal of replacement of an existing society. And so the United States doesn't educate anybody about Native Americans. Since the goal is replacement, you're not going to educate about what's being replaced. And so that holds true for healthcare practitioners. They often know little to nothing about indigenous communities and peoples. And so there's a strong need for people to recognize kind of how colonization plays out. And I'll just a quick fact, when I looked at the 2005 to 2015 life expectancy for citizens of my tribal nation, the data was for men, the average life expectancy from the year 2005 to 15 for people in my society, the Mandan, Hadats, and Arikara, the average life expectancy for men is 53 years. The average life expectancy for women is 60 years. And so we think about how stressful colonization is and how we're not necessarily able to access the care systems that will attend to kind of our emotional, cultural, and spiritual needs as indigenous peoples. And there's a great study I put in there. Dr. Joseph Gahn is probably one of the preeminent Native American researchers on kind of the needs of indigenous health today. And that, and they did a survey in Detroit of indigenous urban population. And 90% of the Detroit respondents of the survey kind of about their own health needs really wanted to access traditional healing in some way, shape, or form. And so the kind of ways of cultural care that Indigenous peoples have done for themselves for time immemorial, and how do we get reconnected to these systems of self-care? And so I kind of think about also the role of Indigenous language, how it plays in helping restore health linkages. An example, 31 communities in Canada found that the more people knew their traditional knowledge and their traditional cultures, the lower the diabetes incidences in those communities. So traditional knowledge and traditional culture is medicine. And so we kind of call it language as medicine as Indigenous peoples, of kind of what are these kind of protective factors can come from for us today. And so knowing maybe healthcare providers would be able to recognize, our cultural assets and languages are incredible springboards for health, and how do medical systems acknowledge how Indigenous knowledge and language function in health overall.
Thank you, Aaron. Super important, right, for institutions to have a cultural awareness of where is a patient coming from, what's a background, how can we pivot the treatment or what we do to make sure that it's relevant to the patient. And again, I speak, for my background, it's you go to the hospital and tell you, well, eat healthy, right? This is healthy for you. This is low in calories. But my mom, for example, she wouldn't know how to make a salad, right? Because this is all strange to her. So I think it's very important for institutions, I think, to have a cultural awareness of it and really understand where the what the limits or the barriers are for the specific patient.
Yeah, to be aware is to be alive. You're spot on. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the next question, I think it's relevant to everyone in the group. I'd like to talk about the concept of masculinity, right? As we grew up, for example, in my case, what it meant to be a man, right? Which can add a little bit to the stigma of, do I seek a health professional? Would I lose my masculinity? And I want to ask you, how has the concept of masculinity in your community dehumanized men of color and made it just more difficult to access what you need? And if anyone wants to start it,
I can start real quick. Just masculinity, as conceived as a United States kind of form of masculinity, is an incredibly small box. It's such a small place to live. And I say this as an Indigenous person where, our gender spectrum is much more vast than the kind of gender binaries that we're often experiencing here in the United States. The Navajo world has like manly man and more feminine man. They're still both cisgender, but it's just an acknowledged kind of identity and kind of a place of how people experience this world. And so I'm really thankful that, as an Indigenous person, I get to exist in a much more broad identity spectrum where it's normal to be kind of the way I am. People probably describe me as a slightly more feminine man, but as a cisgender man, I don't feel the need to prove my masculinity. I was in the military. I graduated from Marine Corps Officer Candidate School. I run a marathon. I've done all these what we consider kind of masculine kind of efforts, but I don't feel like the idea is projecting masculinity is really that important, that I get to exist as a man in whatever way that's important to me, and that my ancestors really had this really understanding of how humans function. And I even think about like the LGBT community, the two-spirit members of our society, and that in my community, the LGBT community members were often healers within our society. We've revered the LGBT and two-spirit members of our society because they have an expanded understanding and expanded vision of humanity. And unfortunately, in colonization, there's much more kind of homophobic attitudes within Indigenous societies today, whereas in many places we elevated the LGBT members to be important leaders and people who would help us process our issues as people in society. So I hope that we can return to the kind of those traditional teachings, at least as Indigenous peoples, and not feel constrained to the very small box of what's acceptable masculinity in U.S. society today. Yeah,
Aaron, I love what you're saying. I'll jump in here. I think One, this false idea of masculinity and what it should be and what it needs to be, unfortunately, has and is destroying the Black community, the Black family, the Black man. Because, growing up, and I'll speak from my experiences, is, you told, don't cry, like, stop crying, like, or don't be soft, crying is for girls. And, or if I like a pink shirt, that's for girls. I can't wear that. And what it did is start to force me and my peers at the time to mask our emotions. Now we grow up not knowing how to express how we feeling, because the moment I express how I feel, I'm considered soft, or I'm considered a punk, or I'm considered, the B word, or I'm considered something that I'm not. And now we grow up into become men, and now we're considered emotionless, right? When we engage with women, if you identify and you engage with the opposite sex, you're considered emotionless because you don't know how to express what you're feeling and what you're going through, because we become, and I like what Aaron said, we become boxed into a definition of manhood. And I was reading this guy, Jason Williams. He talked about like, you can't define manhood, and the way we define it, be strong, be tough, like make a lot of money. And because we become limited in that definition, it limits how much we grow and evolve and expand as men. And to have one, you have to have the opposite. And I just can't be strong all the time. Like I have to. Like this is impossible for me to be strong all the time. It's impossible for me to provide all the time. Like if my health take a toll, right, I may need to take the back seat and let someone else step up. So I think we have to get out of this mindset of this idea that you can define manhood, and you really can't, because it's so broad. There's so much to it. And I think as men, we poke holes in that by showing and learning how to express that. But I think first we just have to acknowledge that what we were taught just wasn't the right things, and people displaced or projected what they think a man should be. And I get it. Our forefathers had to present that way as a way of protection, as a way to survive. But, though we're still caught up in some of those issues in society, when you know better, you start to do better. And I think as we as men continue to learn to express ourselves, we can restore the Black community. And it doesn't become a competition between me and another man. It's like if a man is needing support or need a hug and needs love, it doesn't make me less of a man to embrace that brother, to say, hey, I got you. I love you. I'm looking out for you. So I think we just have to redefine what manhood is, and redefine it in knowing that we can't be limited in the definition. There's so much more to it.
To add on to that, when we were growing up, I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and it was
the
same thing. Like you had to be tough, not like beat up people and all that, but just tough. Like you had to be able to stand up like a man, look someone in the eye, talk like a man, when actually a lot of us, it should have been like, this is how you should be a kid. This is what kids do. And this is how kids, interact with one another, and more of that sort of nurturing, which, I would say the generation before mine, or so like my father and mother, it wasn't really about that. It was just about, you have to be this way for these reasons. Because I grew up I have 7 sisters and 1 brother, but, living with women, it's like, you can't be like women. You can't, this and that. And it's like, you're not trying to be like them. I mean, you just live with them, you interact with them all the time, that kind of thing. And so, it's sort of, things are frowned upon, but it's just about being a kid. And I think, as Walter was saying, when you didn't cry or you didn't do certain things when you were younger, by the time you become a grown man and you get into your later in life, a lot of mental health issues take place because you have all this built up in you, and there's nowhere to let it go or how to let it out. And I think a lot of men, Black and brown, that's how it kills you. That's like when they say stress kills you, and certain things like break your body down. It's because you went your entire life holding everything in, and by the time you let something out, it's explosive. So it's really sad, I mean, I probably hadn't cried for years until my mother passed. And when I started, it opened up this this window where I just couldn't stop. And it was all of this was built up for years and years and pent up, energy and maybe some anger or maybe some hopelessness, some love and all these different things. And, once you open that door, how do you maintain, who you are, but being able to release, this energy? And so I think it's really tough for men of color. I do. It's not, and not that even that folks who are in other groups hold you to it, but it's like the people around you hold you to it. Women hold you to it. Girls hold you to it. And everyone's pushing the same narrative. So it's really tough for folks to let go. And at some point, you just have to let go, because if you don't, that's where, a lot of this other stuff comes from, that's just negative. And so, I don't have the answer, but I hope we can get to a point where it's that kids are able to be kids, and, we can teach them how to release this, this pent up aggression or whatever for men at a young age. And so it's not detrimental when they become older.
And that's what I think about, how much we rob our boys of boyhood by declaring them to be men before it's their time, because I had to grow up to be a man, and I was like 8 years old. My mom was like, be the man of the house. Okay, like whatever that means. And now I'm operating in an adult-like capacity, not knowing what that even means, and really missing out on being a kid, being a child, and enjoying that. So I think about that, man, the societal pressures of forcing our boys to be men before their time. And now we strip them and rob them of so much that they can explore and experience as kids. And you spot on with that, Lawrence.
I think about the indigenous concept of although it's widely misinterpreted, there's warrior societies within indigenous communities today. And obviously in our kind of era of pre-colonization, we had a lot of scuffles with one another as indigenous nations. And there's a reason for kind of warrior societies within our place. But ultimately, the concept is like character, what is your character as a human being? Not necessarily thinking of the man, but your character. Are you a good person? Do you care about trying to elevate the positive parts of other people? And so I think, when the people are cold, you bring them warmth. When the people are hungry, you bring the food. You try to contribute as much as you can to a community with the skill set you have. And I think that's the kind of measure we try to think of indigenous societies. We don't care about your title. It's like, what's your character, and can you get stuff done? And it doesn't matter your outward expression. It's just your capacity and your character.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Aaron.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Walter.
No, I'll leave it alone because I keep going on that topic.
No,
right. Me too.
That's a very, very important topic, very important discussion. And Lawrence, thank you for noting that sometimes it's important to simply let go, right? Because it's not drinking in excess that makes you a man, right? It's not these things that are associated with being manly. If we're at a table, everyone is having, burgers, fries, and a beer. It's okay to say, I want a salad. That would make you exactly. You're taking care of your health. It reminds me, the other day I was shopping for spinach, and I saw this big box, and then the brand that said organic girl, right? It's something that I eat, and let's there to buy the product. It doesn't matter what the brand says or what what it resembles. It's good for me. And same goes for mindfulness practices, right? You go to a class, and it can be intimidated as a guy to go to a yoga class. Like, I've never been to one. So, to dare to engage in all these practices that are good for one's health, and remind the men of the audience that doesn't make us any less of men because we engage in healthy practices, right? So thank you for your input. And if you feel like you want to add to that, feel free to do so.
I think it's covered well. And I love what Aaron is saying is that it's that mindset we have to have. And if we can just meet each other on the values based, on the character based, right. It minimizes this need to compete, or, I have to have the finest whatever to show that I'm doing something. It's like, when you die, you can't take this stuff with you, man. Somebody gonna take it, they're gonna sell it, they're gonna do something with it, and it's gonna be done. But yeah, we can move on to the next question.
Yeah. Well, it's very, very similar to what we're talking about. The next question relates to conversations that we need to have. What conversations do we need to have among us to promote healthy habits, right? Because it's something that we don't typically talk about, or we don't talk about enough, right? So how do we make space for these conversations? How do we approach other men and be open about these topics that relate to simply, taking care of our health?
Yeah, I think platforms like this is perfect, just to put other men on the front line and say, hey, here are my lived experiences, and here how I've learned and navigated, and here are the mistakes I've made. And I'm imperfect. I'm human, right? And I'm still figuring it out. And I also think in those spaces, not shaming people, which I think oftentimes cause people to be pushed away or be hesitant to step up. Because if I shame one for bringing to me, I mean, as a therapist, right? If I shame one of my clients for talking about something that's uncomfortable or something that they're not pleased with, I cause harm to that person. And my objective isn't to do that. And I think as men, if we learn to not pass shame to one another, but be more inviting and be more welcoming and empathetic and understanding, and walking with someone and being with them and sitting in whatever space they're in, versus saying, oh man, you shouldn't have did that, or, making them feel bad for what they did, because that causes one to suppress and hold in those experiences, and then prevent us as men from talking about it. So I think spaces like this, something that I'm passionate about and that I'm creating is what I'm calling these mental health experiences, right? I recognize that not all people want to sit across from me and have conversations. So for men, actually this coming Monday, April 18th, I'm hosting what I'm calling a Breathe, Kick, Stretch, Let It Go, where I'm inviting men to learn the art of kickboxing, but not in the sense of using it, but teaching men how to become in control of themselves. Because I believe when you can control you can control the room, you can control everybody around you. And because you know how to do something, don't mean you should do something, right? So I'm inviting men to be in spaces to where now we can have that mind-body connection. And as men, we like to get physical and we like to do things with our bodies. And yoga may work for some and it may not work for others. But this is a way of us releasing that aggression, like Lawrence was talking about, releasing that tension, but also being able to talk about it and process it, to say, man, I was mad as hell, but now that I got the energy out, I feel okay. I feel like I can keep pushing. I can keep journeying on. So I think it's important that we hold spaces and minimize the shame and be more welcoming and inviting.
Right. I agree. I mean, I think this is a great idea. That's why when I learned about it, I told Henry, I'm like, I definitely want to be involved. And I'm like, you can put me on any panel, I'll speak on any panel. But, related to this, but kind of back to the masculinity, sort of, one of the things I was thinking is that one of the earlier questions, like, how do we get, African-American, Black and brown men involved? But folks have to realize there's been a long journey in our community where we were taught that there were two things that were really not that good for you. That was doctors and hospitals and police. Like you feared police and you feared doctors and you feared going to the hospital because you never knew how you were going to come out of the situation. And, there needs to be more forums like this where we can have conversations and we can provide information and, it will help people and pass the word. And actually, I think they'll do a little bit more research and be a little bit more open to talk about these things. But I remember growing up as a kid in the 70s and early 80s, that those were the two things. You did not want to see a doctor and be in the hospital, and you definitely did not want to see police. So these are things that, it's going to take, it's going to take a long time for us to figure out how to, get out of this space, but especially we need to really get out of the space around, the medical field, because we're missing out. We are truly missing out.
I just add that, indigenous nations have thrived because of a community-centric mentality. Strong, robust communities lead to healthy individuals. And so everybody trying to contribute to a community is so important. So I always tell students in our university, I'm like, community is almost always the answer. But trying to build healthy communities takes work. And on indigenous peoples, we come from vastly different cultures and there's 169 different indigenous languages spoken in the United States today. And so, and 2/3 of Native Americans today are affiliated with some Christianity denomination in some way, shape, or form. So we have vastly different spiritualities and religions as well. So it takes us time to get to know each other. And so for us, it really needs to be some spaces that allow us to learn about each other. And it doesn't have to be focused and direct to begin with. We can just have some meals together so we learn about each other a little bit. And maybe as we get to know each other better, we can think about, our own community. And although it's not necessarily the viewpoint of my ancestral nations, it's, most people know it as like the seventh generation. Like we should think about making decisions today for the welfare of 7 generations after us. And so we should think deeply about that. And it provides an entry point for us, at least as Indigenous men, to think about the health and vitality of our society. So we think about the suffering of youth today, the mental health crisis of youth right now. What are we doing that's contributing to, mental youth struggling so greatly in the United States today? Probably social media is a huge culprit part of that too, but thinking about how we as a community can support youth. And so it provides us an avenue to understand, okay, we have a very loose Native American community in Madison right now. We kind of are really hungry for a charismatic leader to kind of bring together an intertribal community here in the city. But the Ho-Chunk have their own community in cultural ways. And I think of all the ceremonies and the kind of ancient traditions that they carry forward as a society and how that provides them stability, and it provides them for kind of learning and care of how they as a society and men within their society can contribute to the well-being of their society. So once again, that kind of community is almost always the answer. And we see it kind of modeled in the Ho-Chunk Nation, the ancestral nation, where Ugde Jope of what is now known as Madison, and the ways that they try to produce health within their society by connecting people to each other within their community.
Thank you, Aaron. And that's key, right? I mean, how do we support our youth? Because these are the people of the future. And how do we emphasize how important it is to care for our health, just physical health or mental health? And one of the things that Walter touched on earlier is being empathetic and being encouraged. And you also mentioned kickboxing as a way to, as a therapeutic thing to do. And I think it's very important, to encourage our youth to just engage in healthier habits from early on. For example, when I was in early high school, there wasn't as much engagement in sports from my community. And the moment that you try to participate in either track and field or soccer or basketball, then sometimes the other kids will tell you, well, what are you doing? You're trying to be white, which is the wrong message, right? It's the wrong message. We should encourage our communities to really participate in healthy activities from early on, and not just that, but there are others that should be addressed, like hygiene, things like that to our youth, which is key. Sometimes, unfortunately, we start. Sometimes I think about my family members. They're once they're diagnosed with diabetes in the mid 40s or late 40s. You change habits, which is good, but it would have been much better if this was done, in your teens and early 20s. So, with that, I want to address a question that came from the audience, which also relates to what I have thought about, and Lawrence talked about the distrust of our healthcare systems, because you don't know, you don't want to, you can't trust doctors. And how do we, because we often talk about our institutions and what they can do and what other organizations can do to engage our communities, to be culturally aware. But what can we do? What can we do to try and reduce that level of distrust of those institutions? How can we encourage, and it goes back to one of the earlier questions, encourage our community to purposely seek out help and don't be afraid to openly talk about the concerns that we're facing. And anyone can take that question.
I can get us started. We Indigenous people have every reason to be distrustful of the public institutions of the United States, because all of them were employed in the eradication of our language and culture, or even tried to limit our populations. about a quarter of Native American women were sterilized without their consent by the Indian Health Service in the 1970s. So there's inordinate amounts of distrust of public kind of health institutions, considering how they're used in kind of genocidal ways to eradicate our cultures or potentially limit our populations. And so there's still a lot of mistrust out there. But thankfully, there's a lot of tribally based services now. I think of the Ho-Chunk Wellness Center. I think of the Bureau of Indian Affairs Health System sometimes provide a tremendous amount of community and support for people. And so it's recognizing that it's going to still taking time. We're still going to run into providers who don't listen to us or don't want to understand our perspectives necessarily. But overall, the trend is toward a greater understanding of how Indigenous kind of culture, language, and spirituality really contribute toward well-being for Indigenous peoples. I put it before, but Dr. Joseph Gahn is a leading scholar, and he kind of laments that, unfortunately, there'll never be enough Native American healthcare providers to meet the kind of urgent crisis of healthcare needs of Native Americans. But for those who are able, we really need to help train other people in some way, shape, or form. So he created this incredibly robust website, trying to encourage other health providers to understand how they can provide culturally competent care to Indigenous peoples across the United States. And then thankfully, we have like the Native American Center for Health Professions here at the UW-Madison School of Medicine and Public Health, which has pushed our School of Medicine and Public Health to one of only 2 eligible Native American centers of excellence in the United States. And so I think about how Indigenous people and the agency of Indigenous people in engaging healthcare systems to expand kind of an understanding of what healthcare is needed by kind of at least Native American and Alaska Native or Native Hawaiian peoples in our society today.
Thank you, Aaron. And,
I'll add,
go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Walter. No.
Yeah, I would add, I think in addition to that, I think that the narrative is important as well in the language we use. As a mental health provider, like I'm very intentional not to say, mental illness or disease and, a lot of the negative terms that comes with a lot of negative connotation. I'm very intentional not to do that because I do believe there's power in what we say. So I often shift it to mental wellness, mental health. You're not suffering from, you're living with, right? Because sometimes what we say, it can show up in our body and it seems like, man, something's just wrong with me. I'm ill, I'm sick, I'm nasty. I don't want to be around, or no one wants to be around me. So I think as we work with systems, just working to change the language and the narrative, I think it can land. And once you hear it, it doesn't sound so harsh on the heart and on the mind. And I think it's power in that. And when we can change our narrative, we can behave a certain way, because what we think and what we feel, how we behave, it's all connected. That mind, body, spirit connection is there. So I would challenge us to just think about how we say things, how we present it, because that'll make a difference.
And to add to that, I mean, the healthcare system as well, over the years, we know with African Americans as well, there have been some issues. Folks know about these issues and they're skeptical. I mean, yeah. So like I've been to the hospital before as a young kid, and you see someone sitting in the emergency room with a gunshot wound, and it's like 30 minutes or so. And there are all kinds of things that lead you to, that makes your perception more so what you've heard or what the rumors or whatever, the things are. And so it's like folks are skeptical. We've all had folks who went to the doctors for a year or two, and then all of a sudden they go see someone else and they're diagnosed with something, and it's something that should have been determined a year or two ago. And they may have survived, they may have lived. So it's, it's all of these stories that you hear and actual ones that you've witnessed. And so you're skeptical. I was extremely skeptical with, my mother passed, what she had just went through, and then to be diagnosed. And it's like, how can I find someone really that I trust? And you just have to take the time to get, work through that and make sure that, we, the folks who are out there on the front line, assist others in this process. We have to. We have to keep doing things like this. We have to make sure the people that we work with or that we are around, friends and family, are aware, and, just making sure that everyone, you're skeptical, but make a conscious decision about what's going on. Do the research and take the time to figure it out before you just say no. You know, it's tough. It's tough. I know it is, because I went through the situation, and I still kind of feel sort of, you know, a little skittish about my current treatment. But you know, like you said, with the mental, I think that I can push myself through this, but it's tough. So, you know, if I have to get over something like this and I'm more open, just imagine folks who aren't really that open at all. We'll have to help see them through it. That's basically the bottom line.
Yeah, no, thank you, Lawrence. That's extremely important. And, you know, Walter, Aaron, thank you also for your comments. And although the topic today is a future, right? Talking the future of health and wellness. What we really want to do is the changes that, you know, emphasize the changes that we can do now to have a better future when it comes to both our mental health and our physical health. You know, one of the popular quotes that I've heard when it relates to this topic is, you know, the best day to make changes in your life is yesterday, right? The second best day is today, right? So whatever changes we make right now would have an impact in, you know, our health in the future. And, you know, when we were young, we probably often heard that whatever we eat will catch up to us eventually. And so, you know, sometimes we ignored it, sometimes we didn't, but it does, right? So it is important that we have these conversations. And I want to thank you again for participating. I want to thank Medicine 365 for having this very important topic that is health and wellness among our community. So with that, I'd like to end again by thanking you and just have a few seconds. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything to the discussion.
No, but thank you for the opportunity to be here and share my experience and expertise.
Yeah, I'm sorry that it took me getting cancer to learn to be kind to myself. Right. Like it literally took me a near-death experience to learn to finally just being a little nicer to myself. And I hope everybody is just kind to themselves.
Yeah.
Exactly. Aaron, I totally agree. I mean, it took a situation for me to actually, you know, pull the reins back and think about, you know, me, yeah. What do I need mentally and physically? And how do I make that happen? So, yes, I understand. Thank you. I appreciate the other information you shared as well.
Yeah, take care of you. You can take care of everybody else. Take care of you first. Sure.
Exactly. Thank you, everyone. And with that, I think we're out of time for the panel today. Again, thank you, all the participants, all the panelists. Want to thank the audience for joining us today. And
appreciate it.
We'll see you next time.
This is 365 Media.